Welcome back to the Music Theory Podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and let us know in the comments what you'd like us to analyze next. Welcome again for our second session about Chopin's tonal ambiguity and more Prelude adventures for today. So last time we spoke about the E minor Prelude, the fourth Prelude, Opus 28, and today I want to look into a far less popular one, but maybe even more interesting one, namely the second Prelude in A minor. So let's immediately take a look at the score. Okay, so any spontaneous reaction to what you just heard?
Awesome. Very well. We talked quite a great deal about some romantic quotations. The video is not yet online, but it will probably already be online when we post this video. So, I mean, you just keep thinking about atonical space, and maybe there are probably moments, especially when you have these diminished chords, if I read that correctly, a diminished chord on A going to a diminished chord on F sharp in the third, approximately the third staff.
Yeah.
This is a moment where you are probably quite unsure which tonic you would suspect, but
Yes.
that would be just one impression I would like to give straight away.
Yes, I definitely agree that on the third system for a while there is uncertainty regarding the key in which we are, and not only there is uncertainty, there is also conflict, right? If right away, if we hear that we have a prelude in A minor and we get this beginning, I would say there is immediately some conflict going on.
Yeah, so I mean I'm very naive, right? I'm not really. It might be that I heard this piece some day ago, so it rings a bit familiar to me. But I would just suspect E minor in the beginning. So I wouldn't dream of A minor, especially with Lydian strange Lydian fourth in the E minor chord right in the beginning. Wouldn't dream of A minor.
Exactly.
And,
so
yeah.
so the piece just simply starts in the wrong key.
Hell yes.
It starts in the wrong key, and yeah, immediately that's problematic. More so even than the one prelude we saw last time, the E minor.
Yeah.
I mean, it did start with a problem, but this one starts with a headache, right? It's not mysterious. It's just plain weird. And
yeah.
And as you said, the Lydian kind of E sharp that we get at the beginning, this kind of neighboring note, doesn't help, right? It makes it even worse.
It's a very ugly sound, I think. Yeah.
It's a very ugly sound. Ugly is a good word. I like that word in the context of this piece, because I think this piece, it is ugly in a way. And that's what makes it so fascinating. I think Schumann said something along those lines regarding this prelude. I think something like it's not even music anymore, something like that. The way he was not a fan of the preludes apparently in general. So he didn't say that with some sort of poetic distance or anything. He really meant it, which is one of the reasons I prefer Chopin. Okay. So yes, right away we have a terrible problem. This E minor that, in spite of all ugliness, seems to be the tonic. Right? There is actually not much reason to question that.
Yeah.
And maybe we can try to outline a harmonic scheme for the entire piece at first. That would be some sort of a preliminary analysis.
Yeah.
So after we have this E minor, the first change that we actually get is E moving to D, which gives us 6/4 suspension over D.
Yeah.
This 6/4 suspension is resolved in the next bar. First we have the 6 going to 5, and then the 4 going to 3. We have a wonderful D major at the end of the first system that resolves to G major in the second system. And so we have some sort of a cadence. And so far, I would say everything is coherent, right? We start with E minor. Well, we get to first cadence, it goes to G major. It's still relative. So yeah, it's fine, right? There's a lot of neighboring notes, but yeah.
Yeah, it is sort of fine. I mean, you expect a minor key to go into its relative key in a minor piece. But I think not as a part of a 6/5 cadence, right? So it is just that. It is if you would interpret the E minor as 6th scale degree, and then you go to the 5th scale degree with a 6/4 suspension going to a normal dominant and then resolving. So for me, it strikes a bit odd that in hindsight, E minor was in context with the other sounds, just the 6th scale degree in the cadence move to G major.
Yeah, I understand what you mean, yes. It's a little abrupt.
The move to the 6/4 chord is the point where you would say, oh, okay, it's already a bit destabilizing.
Yes. Yes, but in a way, these, I think as a listener, you kind of grab everything you can, right? And this diatonic movement, the bass and the 6/4 resolving, etc., are such recognizable, definitely tonal devices that in the context of all this neighboring note dissonance stuff, you're kind of bound to be like, yes, sure, okay, I know that one, right? So you would just follow along, I would say. Even though you're right, it's a very short, very compact, very abrupt modulation. But you have literally nothing else that is like really understandable at first, I would say. And yeah, I would say this first cadence, moving to G major, is kind of the first thing, apart from the semi-stable E minor that you get at the beginning. It's the first thing you can really count on in a way. It's a real tonal cadence, functional. Even if it's abrupt, it works. And yeah, what's interesting is what happens next, actually. So you have this G major, which also has neighboring notes, not the same. Not the same as E minor. This time it's the 6th degree that is used as a neighboring note, not the Lydian 4th. But he really uses both 6 degrees, right? So E natural and E flat. And I really like this subtle detail of counterpoint on the second bar of the second system here, where you really have D, E natural, F sharp. Even though you should have E flat if the movement had been kept regular. And that's the way he connects these two chords. That's it. He just has this little E, E, F sharp.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then we're set. We have a new beginning in B minor. This is even more abrupt than the modulation from E to G, but somehow, because of this diatonic movement that we get in the tenor voice, it works.
Yeah, and it's also the 5th scale degree from E minor, right? So the progression from the 1st scale degree to the 3rd to the 5th scale degree is actually the old Baroque possibility to have tonicized stations in a minor key, I guess.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. So we end up being on the 5th scale degree of our E minor, which kind of, it's still kind of compelling to believe that the piece is in E at this point.
Definitely, yeah.
And that's really crazy to me, but I mean, we were almost like at 1/3 of the piece or so, and yeah, we're still in the wrong key.
Yeah.
So what he does here seems very similar to what he did in the first system. So the B natural moves to A, we get a 6/4 suspension.
Yeah.
And in the next bar, the 6/4 suspension is resolved, same as in the first system, even with the same melodic motive. We haven't spoken about melody yet, but it will come later. And we get this A major, and then we expect, of course, for the next bar, D major, because at this point we're already hypnotized by this system. And yeah, we don't get D major. What do we get instead?
Well, I guess I didn't quite correctly analyze it. This might be a 3/4 chord, right? So we would say A, C sharp, D sharp, F sharp with a like a how do you call it, changing note?
Neighboring note. You mean the C double sharp? You mean?
Wechsel note, yeah, correctly. And this would be just without any much interpretation. This would be a half diminished as second inversion, right?
Yeah, exactly. So D sharp half diminished.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, well, I think it's understandable how this can work. Having, instead of your tonic, let's say normally a full diminished chord, it's a possibility. And you can consider the half diminished as a suspension over a full diminished chord. And the voice leading logic would be, well, the A stays in the bass, and then the E goes to D sharp, D sharp stays, and the E in the right hand in the upper voice goes to F sharp, and there you have it.
It might be a good idea to just hear this moment again. And then it would go to the diminished chord, actually. Yeah.
Then yes, it does resolve to a diminished chord.
Yeah, so it is a really nice, elaborate, deceptive cadence here.
Yes.
That's still understandable, and I think also generally what you might expect, right? Some sort of developmental character here in the middle of the piece.
Yes, I mean, you might expect something deceptive, but I wouldn't say you expect this specific chord.
No, it's yeah, that's true. It's like the deception of a deception. And so you would love to have a clear, plain diminished chord, and as you said, there's a very long suspension, way too long, in this very, very slow tempo, where you really get the relief when you already accepted the misery, right? Which is quite ironic.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yes, it's because the tempo is so slow that you really get to, how do you say, to savor every dissonance, right, and every friction that you get in the sound.
Yeah. The suspensions are just unbearably long, so to speak.
The suspensions and even all these neighboring notes that sometimes just give you these false relationships, right? Without any mercy, and they're just there, and they are long. It's not. It's in a way, this prelude is the opposite of Feu Follet. Feu Follet is an etude by Liszt, which if you play in slow motion is unbearably dissonant. But it's very fast and very light, and when it's played at the right tempo, it's very beautiful. And this is basically the opposite. It's like it could be maybe beautiful if you play it very fast, but everything is done to make you really feel the pain.
Yeah.
And as you said, so in the moment we get this deceptive cadence, I would say a normal listener, and even a quite advanced listener, might not know what is going to happen tonally, because even when the half diminished resolves to a full diminished, I don't think you're supposed to know where the music is going to go. I mean, you can maybe believe, okay, maybe it's going to be a dominant that is on B, right? So B that's going to resolve to E back.
Yeah.
Possibility, but it's really uncertain.
Yeah.
It doesn't fit the suspension also. The suspension is not the one you'd expect for this specific dominant. So yeah, so you get this full diminished chord that just switches inversions and stays for a very long time. And what announces the resolution is the right hand, right? Because so far we've had the same theme twice with little change, not very much. And now we get a signal, we get a new note in the right hand.
Yeah.
And so there is hope that the same cadence will come again. And that's where the full diminished chord progresses to a German 6. Is it correct? It's a German?
Yeah. Where you could.
It's not a German. It's maybe French. Yeah.
You don't know, right? It's just a 6 chord with this. But I mean, you still have the C in your memory.
One, yeah. You
get it was very.
You get a B here.
Yeah.
You get to see. I mean, I would be okay with saying it's Italian, and you can interpret whatever you want.
But you're probably right in the last 8 bar, in the last 8 note, it's French then.
Yes, I would say it's a mix. Chord. I would say you could even argue that at first you hear German and at the end French, right? So because you do have the C and then you get the B.
Yeah.
And
we take both things. We are happy for both.
Yeah.
Anything that works, please.
Exactly. Well, in any case, it's a predominant based on an augmented 6. That's I think as long as you understand that, it's okay.
True. Yeah.
And then you get 6/4 suspension on E.
Yeah.
And yeah, this 6/4 suspension is something, I would say. It's because it's here to stay.
Couldn't you just resolve it? Yeah, I thought, you know, the F from the melody in the last staff,
Yeah.
there should be definitely, and he knows that there should be a dominant 7/9 chord.
Yes, of course.
It's no, and we know that when we hear that, we just, yeah, I really feel a little bit, you know, a little bit mocked, a little bit.
Bullied by the piece.
Yeah, bullied. Yeah, I'm really bullied by this F because I know it's supposed to be a dominant 7/9 chord, and then you can have this moment, you know, the dominant is there, you take the chord away, and then you have just a line, solo line.
Yeah.
This is so typical, but it doesn't work when you don't resolve the
It's
6/4.
it's like a broken recitative, right? You you get
Rubbish.
the solo again, and then the continuo forgot to change.
Yeah. The second chance, you get a second chance, right?
And it's also not there. It's still the same 6/4 suspension, and yeah, and then you get a repetition of the second part of the melody, and it's very simple cadence with only one single dissonant.
Yeah.
So you have dominant, dominant of the dominant, 5/5 if you want. Back to the dominant, you add a seventh, you get your cadence.
Yeah, but you don't know this E major chord, right? The first one. This is just a plain E major chord. Then you get the B major chord, also plain chord. All these optional notes which would signify or help you to understand. No, it's actually A minor, for example.
Yeah.
Right, a 7 on the E, full diminished chord on D sharp. All these things.
Yeah. Exactly. It's disarmingly simple, right? Let's just try it.
Yeah.
And again, it's kind of a little reminder that the piece used to be in E.
Yeah.
And at the very last second, there is this turn of events that brings you back to A minor. But that's quite a ride, this piece. So yeah, basically we've outlined what happens overall. So if I recapitulate everything, E minor going to G over a 6/4 cadence, G moving to B minor, B minor acting as if it was going to move to its relative D major, but instead we get half diminished, full diminished, French or German 6 chord that gives us a very, very long 6/4 suspension to A minor. It stays even though it's completely wrong with the melody. And then we get this weird cadence made out of triads, except for the dominant 7 at the very end.
Mm.
So everything about this piece is unusual. I would say there is barely anything that seems to make sense at first glance. And well, I think there are some keys to understanding it. There are some hints left by Chopin, and there is some playing around with expectations and with tradition in this piece. And well, the first thing that I would say can be very striking and can really help to understand what this piece is about is to analyze the melody of the right hand. Mm-hmm. If we take a look at the theme in its first occurrence here, I would say this theme reminds me of a certain kind of music. I don't know what you think.
Well, I must admit I don't have a direct association.
No direct association?
No, it's just like I'm just thinking of, obviously, because we did this piece before, right? The E minor piece, which also has for a long time an extremely simple, very, very slow melody.
Yeah.
But apart from that, no direct associations.
Okay. Well, for me, when I see this melody, I think of very early music. It has something. It is extremely diatonic somehow, to the point that it seems to be modal. What I mean is, you have at the end this kind of, I don't know what could be associated with the soprano clause, but with the whole tone, you don't have any semitone anywhere, which kind of reminds me of the way people thought about modal music in the time of Chopin. I think this F sharp also is kind of strange to me, and so I think it's interesting to kind of sort and maybe label the scale degrees that we get in the melody. So if we start on the first one, E, then we go to the seventh one, okay, over 5, but 7. And at the end, we finally arrive on the 5th. And the 6th is the big one that's really missing, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So you have E, 1, 5, 7, and then you have 4, but it's just a little neighboring note, and you go back to 5. I would say C is the absent note. You would expect a C somewhere, but you don't. Instead, you only get whole tone relationships between notes or jumps. And I think it's kind of strange. It's something noticeable about this melody. It doesn't sound romantic.
I also thought a little bit of pentatonic, parts of a pentatonic scale.
Yes, that's true. Yes. Yeah, it would be part of pentatonic, right?
So
it is, right?
Yeah, it could be a fragment of a pentatonic scale, which could be very important for the very last, from the third staff, when you start with A and then you get the semitone F.
Exactly. So that's the thing. We do get F sharp every time. We get it here. We get it here. And the note F is really avoided, and F sharp is very prominent, especially here.
Yeah.
And I think there is some careful planning and saving of the 6th scale degree of our actual tonic that's really being saved for the most important moment. And what I mean is, here, if we look at the melody again and look in terms of scale degree again, we get 1 again, this time 5, 6. And I think it's no coincidence that there is an accent here. In the corresponding moments, there is no accent. And it's also no coincidence that the A is so long compared to the others. So this one is long, this one is very short, this one is very long. And as you said, the F, I think, is even more striking because it comes with the wrong chord.
Yeah, it's another means to emphasize this F.
Yes, it is. I think it definitely is. And the melody continues. It goes to D, and we get again a wrong accompaniment. And I think if we look, this melody outlines A, F, D. It's kind of compensating for the fact that the piece has begun 1/5 too high.
The subdominant feeling here.
We have the subdominant, even though the chords don't correspond. And I think the fact that the chords don't correspond could be understood as condensating and putting together this compensation of 1/5 too high and bringing us back to the actual key. It's like a mix of having the subdominant and at the same time the dominant in a form that recalls the tonic.
Yeah, true.
It's not 1/5 higher.
And I mean, you also have the F then, right, in the third bar of the last staff. You have the F in the accompaniment.
Yes, true. Yeah.
I think that's also very important, which also supports the very, very dark note of this point, completely different than the harmonization of the D in bar 4, obviously.
Of course, yes.
And it makes this chord just more problematic, I think, because when the F is disturbing the accompaniment itself, it really goes deeper into the harmonic structure.
Yeah.
And I mean, at that point, I'm just like 56% sure that it's still a 6/4 suspension chord, especially because we just hold on to it as if the harmonic progression is somehow stuck, right?
Yeah. And when we do get the resolution, it's a very strange feeling, right? Because it's really uncertain what's going to happen by then. As you said, we've been bullied by the piece so much by here that there is a big lot of uncertainty regarding the actual goal of these chords. All of these considerations, the fact that the piece starts on E instead of A, specifically that those keys are chosen for displaying around, and the fact that extremely consonant chords, very choral-like, kind of make up the end and save the day in an almost unrealistic way. All of these things, they remind me of early music, and particularly of one certain mode, which maybe you have guessed by now.
Well, you mean based on A or based on E?
Exactly. That's the point. That's exactly what I mean. And you know it because you've analyzed pieces like Mille Regrets. So,
yeah.
So what I mean is really the problem of the Phrygian mode.
Yeah, good point. Yeah.
And I think this prelude is kind of an ode to the problem of the Phrygian mode in every way possible. The fact that a minor key and its upper fifth kind of end up being the same,
yeah,
is a very good, I think, symbol for what the Phrygian mode is, and why maybe the Phrygian mode ended up kind of dying in classical music for a while, even though it was revived by the Romantics. But here, I think it's an early attempt to revive it, I would say, and also a very hidden attempt. Also, the fact that we get F sharp all the time, and that the actual Phrygian mode is kept for the end, in a way. So the one defining interval, EF, I mean, it's already here, actually.
Yeah,
here.
You have the F prepared a little bit, but it's a transitory moment, yeah.
I mean, we don't notice it, but this is a Phrygian cadence, right?
yeah, because it's of course it's but at that point, you know, we are just so uncertain, because we could also think on a Wegweiser model, so Teufelsmühle is another word.
Exactly.
Of these things, so we are just in hindsight, we the F and this chord and the sort of the Phrygian connection here supports the A minor vibe or E Phrygian vibe.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's true that it's only in hindsight that you can comprehend this, but I think it's also part of the game that you cannot hear it. That this is encrypted music. It's not music that you're supposed to understand when you hear it.
Yeah.
Even understanding it must be painful. I think you have to pay a price. You know, it's not something that's going to be delivered to you. And the last thing that reminds me of Phrygian is this end here, which I really understand as a wrong supplementum, the famous supplement that you get at the end of a Phrygian piece. Basically, the idea is that when you compose a piece in the Phrygian mode in the Renaissance, pretty quickly composers would become confronted with the problem that Phrygian automatically leads you to the lower fifth. So if you compose in E Phrygian, your piece will tend to end up in A minor.
Yeah.
And at the end of the piece, sometimes they would end on A minor for real, and then bring you a so-called supplementum, so a supplemental cadence. That's basically what we would associate nowadays with a Pagel cadence, 4/1. So where you would have A minor going to E major. And this is it's kind of the same, but the wrong way. Or I even want to say, is it actually the wrong way? I'm not even sure, because we do get a cadence in E.
Yeah.
We do get a full cadence. Yeah.
I mean, in older pieces, you would just have, I think, the so-called Blechacz cadence, which is, if we would be in E, we would have the Phrygian cadence in E, meaning D to E as a soprano cadence clause, and F to E as the tenor clause, and then the bass clause D to A. But you would close in a sound without a third, probably, right? And so here it actually works out in that position, and it's actually a bombshell for me. So I I really didn't see that for a very long time. That's actually the key. I think that's actually the key, and explains the general outline and the very strange dominance of E minor, which is probably maybe this is just maybe that's a Phrygian piece in E.
Exactly.
I think that the point is important to make, which you already said, that we have in Phrygian mode we have the problem with the semitone to the root note, and normally we get a strong tendency to the subdominant. That's why Phrygian mode is also famous for its lamento and death and all these things, these topoi. And we are now in a time where we don't have really any choice other to think harmonies in a vertical way.
Yeah.
And so this problem is immensely greater. So it's just plainly impossible to write an E Phrygian piece in a sort of traditional romantic style. And I guess we have to remember ourselves that it's Chopin. It's not like, it's not like we are in around 1900.
Exactly.
Still very, very early in comparison to what we actually would expect when we hear this sort of piece, right?
Exactly, or even to people like Brahms, right?
Yeah, especially to people like Brahms. So I mean, there's much of, maybe you will correct me, but I get some sort of a Liszt vibe here. Maybe that's totally wrong, but
it's not wrong at all. I hadn't thought of it that way. You get a later Liszt vibe, not only because of the dissonances, that's something that Liszt could have done in his later years, but also because of the very, very succinct melody like pieces. It's not, you don't have a long singing line, you get very short melodic fragments instead.
Oh, it's very dark.
Okay. It's very dark here too, actually.
Yeah, it's because of this Phrygian piece. It really darkens the room.
Okay. Yes.
But do I understand you correctly that this piece is so weird and deliberately weird and problematic because Chopin somehow shows us the impossibility to write a coherent piece in E Phrygian for that high romantic.
I would say so. I would say there is this tendency to show you Phrygian as the broken mode, and inserting this into an A minor piece. And saying A minor can be E Phrygian, and look how catastrophic that is. And there is one little thing that I didn't mention yet on the score, the accompaniment. I don't know if you noticed by hearing, but basically these neighboring notes that we get all the time, they are more or less quoting dies irae.
Ah, okay, yeah. True.
And the first time the dies irae motive actually shows up in its real form, so without an harmonic, like without an augmented third instead of augmented second instead of third, is at the end when we get the 6/4 suspension. And I'm not sure it's actually a quote of dies irae, but it's very possible because in that time it's a common thing to do. There is Berlioz, of course, and there is Liszt. Liszt also wrote a Totentanz a little bit later. So it's a common theme, and I would not be surprised that it's purposefully. I mean, in a piece that really seems to draw from early music tradition that is really being like unearthed in this time. It's something that is being rediscovered with a lot of mistake, as we know, but still, I think it makes sense.
From when exactly is this piece? Do you know that?
Oh, I never remember the date of...
Opus 28, right?
28, yes. I know that he wrote it in Mallorca for a big part.
That would be interesting because I think it's around that time where you have these big historical, historic operas from Meyerbeer, who, by the way, is in Paris. And
yeah, they know each other.
Yeah, and he writes, for example, Les Huguenots, the Huguenots, right? Where you have the Lutheran chorale Ein feste Burg woven into the piece in order to, I mean, it's totally unrealistic that these French Protestants would sing Lutheran chorales. They are much more Calvinistic, I guess, but it was sort of a historicism. And also in the piece about the Münster kingdom, how was it called? Meyerbeer wrote a fake, the prophet, Le Prophète. Meyerbeer wrote a sort of a fake chorale, which is very, very important, and even I think Liszt played with that melody. So it's really the time, as you said, it's really a fascination, I guess, to work with these very ancient chorales or to emulate it.
Yes, I mean, Chopin was not very, he would not really discuss these things very much. And he was also not a composer that reads a lot of books, or at least talks about it. And therefore, there is not so many sources about that kind of inspiration that he might have. He was much more secretive about it than, say, Liszt. Liszt would underline it, right? He would say, he would write on the score, this is a quote from Totentanz, from Dies Irae. So he would, but Chopin is very different in that respect. There is actually an anecdote about this. I think it was about a nocturne, where he composed a nocturne, and then he wrote a title. He wrote, I think something like "After watching Hamlet," something like that. And then just scratched it and said, "You should guess."
Yeah.
And I think it sums up very well the way Chopin would just throw his pieces into the wild. And this prelude, I think, is one of the most cryptic pieces that he ever wrote, the most secretive one, where you can really not get the substance unless you really read through it very carefully.
And I think we should point out, because it sounds much like music theoreticians, he obviously doesn't want to show us the problems composing with Phrygian mode. He uses the problems in order to create a distinct and maybe even very new and original in terms of emotional expression, right? It's a very odd and a very strange feeling we get from this piece, and the technique is by using these impossibilities.
Exactly. It's not about him solving a theoretical problem. No, it's true. Because we tend to think in our universe of analysis, and but it's true. Obviously, Chopin is not so interested in the theoretical problems. He's interested in making art, in making beautiful music.
It's a means to others.
Exactly. Yeah, using this kind of potential that he finds there.
Yeah, and he really taps into something, I guess, because even though it is not beautiful, it is, and it shouldn't be beautiful. It is, yeah, deeply moving in a very odd way.
Right? I think it's an extremely compelling piece of music, exactly because of this peculiar sound, this very dissonant sound.